The morning sun streamed through the blinds as Maggie Peterson packed her suitcase for the third time. She folded her favorite blue cardigan, the one with tiny flowers embroidered on the collar, and pressed it down firmly. The digital scale beside her bed showed 5:45 a.m., 3 hours until her flight. Just breathe, Maggie whispered to herself, a habit she had developed over years of anxiety. At 42, this elementary school teacher from Portland had finally saved enough for her long-promised visit to see her younger sister in Los Angeles. 3 years had passed since they'd last hugged, far too long for sisters once inseparable. Maggie checked her packing list again, running her finger down each item. Medications, check. Phone charger, check. Comfort snacks, check. The last item was circled twice. Seatbelt extender, asked discreetly. The truth was, flying terrified Maggie, but not because of heights or turbulence. At 5'4" and nearly 300 pounds, the cramped confines of economy class had become a source of dread. Each flight meant the same knot in her stomach. Would the person next to her sigh heavily when she sat down? Would she need to ask for that humiliating seatbelt extender in front of everyone? "You've got this," she told her reflection in the mirror, applying a touch of lipstick. Her round face looked back at her, eyes bright despite her nervousness. She had chosen her outfit carefully. Stretchy black pants and a flowing purple tunic that skimmed over her body. Comfortable yet put together, the kind of outfit that wouldn't draw attention. The Uber driver who picked her up was chatty, filling. The 30-minute drive to Portland International Airport with stories about his grandkids. Maggie nodded and smiled, grateful for the distraction from her growing anxiety. "First time flying?" he asked as they pulled up to the departures area. "No," Maggie replied with a small laugh. "Just not a big fan?" The driver smiled kindly. "My wife's the same way, says if people were meant to fly, we'd have wings." This simple moment of connection eased Maggie's nerves as she rolled her suitcase into the bustling terminal. She had arrived early, giving herself plenty of time to navigate security. The extra time was a gift to herself. Rushing only made her sweat, and sweat only made her more self-conscious. The check-in process went smoothly. The airline attendant behind the counter handed back her ID with a smile, and Maggie felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this flight would be different. Maybe today, she could just be another passenger. Security was its usual organized chaos. Maggie joined the line, slipped off her comfortable walking shoes and placed them in the gray bin alongside her purse. The body scanner always made her nervous, another moment of unwanted attention on her size. But the TSA agent waved her through without comment, and Maggie reclaimed her belongings with a silent sigh of relief. With an hour until boarding, she treated herself to a coffee and muffin at a small cafe near her gate. The chair was uncomfortable, its metal arms digging slightly into her sides, but Maggie had mastered the art of making herself smaller in public spaces. She pulled out her phone to text her sister. "At the gate. Flight on time. Can't wait to see you." 3 dots appeared immediately, followed by her sister's reply. "So excited. Got your room already. We're having a welcome dinner tonight. Love, you lots." The message brought a genuine smile to Maggie's face. Whatever discomfort the next few hours might bring, seeing her sister would make it worthwhile. When boarding finally began, Maggie waited until her zone was called. She had paid extra for early boarding, another small gift to herself. Walking onto a plane already filled with watching eyes was something she avoided when possible. The jetway seemed to stretch longer than usual, each step bringing her closer to the moment she dreaded. At the aircraft door, a flight attendant with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a crisp uniform greeted passengers with a practiced smile. "Welcome aboard," she said automatically as Maggie approached. Then her eyes flickered over Maggie's body, and something in her expression shifted. The smile remained, but it no longer reached her eyes. Maggie nodded politely and stepped into the cabin. The narrow aisle stretched before her like an obstacle course. She turned sideways slightly, her carry-on bag clutched to her chest rather than dragged behind her. Years of navigating tight spaces had taught her how to minimize her presence, how to avoid brushing against seated passengers. She found her seat, 14C, an aisle seat she had specifically requested. Small mercies. No window passenger yet, just a young man with headphones already settled into the middle seat. He glanced up briefly, then returned to his phone without reaction. Maggie counted this as a win. Carefully, she stowed her carry-on in the overhead compartment and lowered herself into the seat. The armrests dug into her sides, but it wasn't unbearable. She would manage, as she always did. Next came the moment of truth, the seatbelt. Maggie pulled it across her lap, tugging to extend it fully, and tried to connect the buckle. It wouldn't reach. Her heart sank. She would need to ask for an extender after all. The blonde flight attendant, whose name tag read Nancy, was moving down the aisle, checking overhead compartments. Maggie raised her hand slightly, trying to catch her attention discreetly. "Excuse me," Maggie said softly when Nancy approached. Before she could make her request, Nancy's eyes dropped to Maggie's lap, where her fingers still held the unbuckled seatbelt. "Oh," Nancy said, her voice suddenly louder than necessary. "You need an extender." It wasn't a question. Several passengers looked up. Maggie nodded, her cheeks burning. "Yes, please," she whispered. Nancy didn't move immediately. Instead, she glanced at Maggie's seat, then to the overhead bin, then back to Maggie. "Did you purchase just one seat?" Nancy asked, still using that too loud voice. The question hung in the air. The young man beside Maggie shifted uncomfortably, pretending to adjust his headphones. "Yes," Maggie replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Just my ticket, 14C. Nancy pursed her lips. "I'm not sure you're going to fit properly in a single seat," she said, gesturing vaguely toward Maggie's body. "It's actually airline policy that passengers who require additional space should purchase 2 seats." More heads turned now. An older woman across the aisle looked away quickly, embarrassed on Maggie's behalf. Someone a few rows back whispered something Maggie couldn't hear. "I fit fine," Maggie said, her voice barely audible. "I just need the extender for safety." "Well," Nancy continued, seemingly oblivious to Maggie's growing distress, "the armrest needs to be able to come down completely, and passengers shouldn't overflow into adjacent seats." She emphasized the word overflow, just enough to make her point clear. Tears pricked at the corners of Maggie's eyes. She blinked them back furiously, determined not to cry in front of a plane full of strangers. "Please," she said. "I've flown many times. I just need the extender." A line was forming in the aisle behind Nancy now, passengers trying to reach their seats. Nancy sighed dramatically. "I'll need to check with the head flight attendant about this," she said. "We might need to have you deplane and purchase an additional ticket for the next available flight." The word deplane sent a jolt of panic through Maggie's chest. The idea of being forced to walk back through the cabin past all these witnesses to her humiliation was unbearable. "Please don't," Maggie said, her voice breaking. "My sister is waiting." "I understand you have arrangements," Nancy cut her off. "But airline safety regulations are very clear. If you can't fit safely in one seat with the armrest down and the seatbelt fastened, is there a problem here?" The new voice came from 3 rows back, deep and calm. Maggie couldn't see who had spoken through her blur of tears, but she heard Nancy's sharp intake of breath. "No problem, sir," Nancy said, her tone suddenly professional again. "Just a seating issue I need to address." "It seems like you're addressing it in a way that's causing unnecessary discomfort," the man's voice continued. He was moving up the aisle now, and passengers were turning to look at him instead of at Maggie. As he came into view, Maggie noticed a few things at once: worn jeans, a simple dark baseball cap, and a kind face partially hidden behind a neatly trimmed beard. There was something familiar about him, but in her distress she couldn't place it. "I don't think discussing seating arrangements in front of everyone is the most professional approach," the man continued quietly. He wasn't being confrontational, just matter of fact, which somehow made his intervention more powerful. Nancy's cheeks flushed. "Sir, I'm just following protocol." "I believe the protocol involves treating passengers with dignity," he replied. "Maybe you could start by bringing the seatbelt extender that was requested?" Several passengers nodded in agreement. The atmosphere in the cabin had shifted. Maggie was no longer alone in this moment. Nancy hesitated, then nodded stiffly. "Of course, I'll be right back." As she hurried toward the front of the plane, Maggie finally got a better look at her unexpected defender. When recognition dawned, her embarrassment only deepened. Even with the casual clothes and cap, there was no mistaking him now. Keanu Reeves had just witnessed her most humiliating moment. The man who had stood up for her gave her a small, reassuring smile and returned to his seat without another word, seemingly uninterested in acknowledgement or thanks. Moments later, a different flight attendant appeared with a seatbelt extender, handling it over discreetly with a kind smile. As Maggie fastened her seatbelt at last, she realized her hands were still shaking. But alongside the humiliation, another feeling was emerging. Gratitude for a simple act of kindness from the most unexpected source. The flight to Los Angeles would be taking off soon. And somehow, Maggie knew this journey was going to be unlike any other she had taken before. Keanu Reeves settled back into his seat, pulling his baseball cap lower over his eyes. He hadn't planned to draw attention to himself on this flight. After wrapping up 3 intense weeks of stunt training for his next film, he'd been looking forward to a quiet journey to visit his sister in Los Angeles. But some things were more important than staying under the radar. From his aisle seat in row 11, he had witnessed everything. The flight attendant's deliberate humiliation of the woman in the purple tunic, the stares from other passengers, the quiet dignity with which she'd tried to handle the situation. It had made his stomach twist with a familiar anger. His mother had raised him better than to stay silent when someone needed help. A flight attendant, not Nancy but an older man with salt and pepper hair, stopped by his row. "Mr. Reeves," he said quietly, bending slightly to keep their conversation private. "I just wanted to apologize for the scene. Nancy is fairly new, and I assure you this isn't how we typically treat our passengers." Keanu shook his head. "I'm not the one who deserves an apology." The flight attendant, his name tag read Thomas, nodded in understanding. "Rest assured, it's being addressed. Is there anything I can get you before takeoff?" "Just some water, thanks," Keanu replied. As Thomas moved away, Keanu glanced back toward row 14. The woman was sitting rigidly, staring straight ahead, her face still flushed with embarrassment. The seat beside her remained empty, a small mercy in an otherwise terrible situation. The plane filled quickly. A businessman stopped beside the empty seat in row 14, checked his ticket, then slid in next to the woman. Keanu watched as she shifted slightly, trying to make herself smaller. The businessman didn't acknowledge her, immediately pulling out his laptop. Nancy had returned to the cabin and was demonstrating the safety features with robotic precision, avoiding eye contact with both Keanu and the woman in row 14. The plane began its taxi toward the runway, the engines rumbling beneath them. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're third in line for takeoff," the captain's voice crackled through the speakers. "Flight time to Los Angeles today will be 2 hours and 45 minutes. Weather looks good, so we're expecting a smooth ride." As the plane accelerated down the runway, Keanu caught snippets of conversation from the row behind him. "That's definitely him. Keanu Reeves. Are you sure? Why would he be in economy?" "He's known for that. Taking the subway, living normally." "What was that about earlier? With that big woman?" "Shh, he might hear you." Keanu pretended not to notice, keeping his gaze fixed on the safety card in the seat pocket. He was used to this, the whispers, the covert photos, the assumptions. It came with the territory. Usually he could tune it out, but today hearing them talk about the woman made his jaw clench. The plane lifted off, banking slightly as it rose above Portland. Keanu watched the city shrink beneath them, buildings becoming tiny squares, roads turning into thin lines. There was always something peaceful about seeing the world from above, a reminder of how small human problems could be in the grand scheme of things. Except, of course, when those problems involved human dignity. Those were never small. 20 minutes into the flight, the seatbelt sign dinged off. Passengers began to shift in their seats, some heading to the restrooms, others retrieving items from overhead bins. Thomas rolled the beverage cart down the aisle, starting service from the front. Keanu noticed Nancy approaching from the back of the plane, holding a clipboard. She stopped at row 14. Through the gap between seats, he could see her lean down to speak to the woman in purple. "Ma'am, I wanted to apologize for earlier," Nancy said, her voice just loud enough for Keanu to catch. "It was unprofessional of me to discuss the matter so publicly." The woman nodded stiffly, but didn't respond. "I've noted in our system that you should receive a complimentary beverage during service," Nancy continued, her tone suggesting she believed this adequate compensation for the humiliation she'd caused. "Thank you," the woman said quietly, clearly, wanting the interaction to end. Nancy lingered a moment longer. "Just for future reference, though, the airline does recommend purchasing an additional seat for comfort if... Is there anything else?" The woman cut her off, her voice trembling. Slightly, Nancy pressed her lips together. "No, that's all." She turned and headed back toward the galley, brushing past Keanu's row without looking at him. The beverage cart reached Keanu's row. Thomas handed him a bottle of water with a knowing look. "Everything okay back there?" Keanu asked quietly. Thomas sighed. "Nancy's been spoken to. Some people just shouldn't work with the public." After Thomas moved on, Keanu sat with his water, turning the bottle in his hands as he considered what to do. He wasn't one for grand gestures or public statements. His natural inclination was to help quietly, then fade into the background. But something about this situation felt unfinished. Making up his mind, he stood and walked toward the back of the plane. As he passed row 14, he noticed the woman was alone again. Her seatmate had gone to the restroom. She was looking out the window, her reflection in the glass showing the remnants of unshed tears. Keanu stopped beside her row. "Excuse me," he said gently. She turned, surprise registering on her face as she recognized him. "Oh, hello. I just wanted to check if you're okay," he said, keeping his voice low. "That wasn't right how you were treated." The woman blinked rapidly. "I'm fine," she said automatically, then added with a small, sad smile. "Used to it, I guess. But thank you for speaking up. Not many people would." "I'm Keanu," he said simply, offering his hand. "I know," she replied with a slight laugh, then seemed embarrassed by her response. I'm Maggie Peterson." They shook hands briefly. "Listen, Maggie," Keanu continued. "I actually have 2 seats in my row. The middle one is empty. If you'd be more comfortable, you're welcome to move up there. Might be nice to have some extra space." Maggie looked startled by the offer. "That's very kind, but I couldn't impose." "It's no imposition," Keanu assured her. "Actually, to be honest, I hate flying alone. Some company would be nice." It wasn't entirely true. He often preferred solitude while traveling, but the white lie seemed worth it when he saw the relief cross her face. "Well, if you're sure." Maggie hesitated. "Completely sure," Keanu nodded. "Need help with your things?" 5 minutes later, Maggie was settled into the seat next to Keanu in row 11. The move had attracted curious glances, but Keanu's casual demeanor made it seem like the most natural thing in the world. He'd helped her gather her small bag and water bottle, then led the way back to his row as if they'd planned it all along. "Better?" he asked as she fastened her seatbelt, with a bit more ease this time, though she still needed the extender. "Much," Maggie admitted. "Thank you." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Keanu returned to his book, a worn paperback copy of The Art of Happiness by the Dalai Lama, while Maggie looked through the in-flight magazine. "I love that book," she said eventually, nodding toward his reading material. Keanu looked up with genuine interest. "You've read it?" "Several times," Maggie nodded. "I teach 4th grade, and I actually borrow some of the concepts for my classroom. 10-year-olds are more philosophical than people give them credit for." "I bet they are," Keanu smiled. "What's your favorite part?" As Maggie began to explain how she used mindfulness techniques with her students, her earlier tension visibly melted away. Her hands, which had been tightly clasped in her lap, now moved animatedly as she spoke. Her voice grew stronger, more confident. Keanu found himself genuinely engaged in the conversation. There was something refreshingly authentic about Maggie. No pretense, no agenda, just a passionate teacher who loved her students. "Sorry," she said after a while, catching herself mid-story about a classroom meditation gone hilariously wrong. "I'm talking too much." "Not at all," Keanu assured her. "It's fascinating. You sound like an amazing teacher." Maggie blushed slightly. "I try. Teaching was all I ever wanted to do, even as a kid. Though I had a brief phase of wanting to be a veterinarian." "What changed your mind?" "Biology class," she laughed. "Turns out I faint at the sight of blood. Not ideal for animal medicine." Their conversation flowed easily after that, moving from careers to books to films. Maggie confessed she'd seen most of his movies but promised not to go all fangirl on him. Keanu shared a few behind-the-scenes stories that made her laugh out loud. Neither of them noticed Nancy watching from the galley, her expression unreadable. Neither saw the discreet photos being taken by passengers a few rows back. In that moment, they were just two travelers sharing stories at 30,000 feet. When Thomas came by with the snack service, he smiled at the sight of them deep in conversation. "Anything from the cart?" he offered. "I'm good," Keanu replied, then turned to Maggie. "How about you?" "Just a ginger ale, please," she said. As Thomas handed her the plastic cup and napkin, he leaned in slightly. "I want to personally apologize for your experience earlier. It doesn't reflect our airline's values." Maggie nodded, accepting his words with grace. "Thank you." After Thomas moved on, Keanu noticed Maggie's expression had grown thoughtful. "What is it?" he asked. She hesitated. "Can I ask you something, and feel free not to answer if it's too personal?" "Sure," he nodded. "Why did you step in back there? Most people would have just watched or looked away." Keanu considered her question carefully. "Because it was wrong," he said simply. "And sometimes doing nothing is the same as saying it's okay." Maggie smiled, her eyes brightening with unshed tears. Different from before, tears of gratitude rather than humiliation. "Well, thank you," she said softly. "It's something I won't forget." As the plane continued its journey toward Los Angeles, neither Maggie nor Keanu could have predicted how this chance encounter would unfold, or that their story was just beginning. The plane hit a patch of turbulence, causing drinks to slosh and passengers to grip their armrests. Maggie's ginger ale spilled slightly onto her napkin. She dabbed at it quickly, hoping it wouldn't drip onto her purple tunic. "Never been a fan of turbulence," she admitted to Keanu, her knuckles whitening as she held her plastic cup. "It helps if you think of it as the ocean," Keanu replied, seeming perfectly calm despite the shaking cabin. "Just waves in the air." Maggie raised an eyebrow. "Waves that could drop us 30,000 feet. But they won't," he said with a gentle smile. "Planes are designed for this, like boats in a storm." The captain's voice crackled over the speakers, confirming Keanu's reassurance. "Folks, we're hitting some choppy air as we pass over the mountains. Nothing to worry about, but I've turned on the seatbelt sign as a precaution. Flight attendants, please return to your seats." As the announcement ended, Nancy hurried past their row, deliberately avoiding eye contact with either of them. Maggie watched her go, a small frown creasing her forehead. "Something on your mind?" Keanu asked, noticing her expression. Maggie hesitated. "I was just thinking, I wonder if she's ever been on the receiving end of what she did to me, if she knows what it feels like." Keanu considered this. "Maybe not exactly what you experienced, but everyone has felt shame or humiliation at some point." He paused. "Though that doesn't excuse her behavior." "No, it doesn't," Maggie agreed. She took a slow breath. "You know what's strange? Part of me still feels like I should apologize to her. Like I'm the one who caused trouble by existing in a bigger body." Keanu shook his head firmly. "That's not strange. That's what happens when people make you feel like you don't belong in spaces that should be for everyone." The insight surprised Maggie. She hadn't expected such a deep understanding from someone who appeared to move through the world with such ease. "How did you get so wise?" she asked with a small laugh. Keanu shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. "I've just had a lot of time to think about things. About how we treat each other. How easy it is to be kind, and how rarely we choose it." The turbulence subsided and the plane leveled out again. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow across the cabin. Outside, the landscape had changed from dense forest to desert, signaling their approach to California. "So," Keanu said, changing the subject, "you mentioned you're visiting your sister?" Maggie's face lit up. "Yes. Lisa. She moved to LA 3 years ago for work. We used to be inseparable growing up, but now we only see each other once a year or so. She's pregnant with her first child. I'm going to be an aunt." "Congratulations," Keanu smiled. "First-time aunt?" "Yes," Maggie nodded excitedly. "They're having a girl, due in about 4 months. I'm staying for 2 weeks to help them get the nursery ready." As Maggie talked about her sister's pregnancy and her plans for the visit, Keanu listened attentively. There was something refreshing about her enthusiasm, her obvious love for her family. In his world, conversations often came with hidden agendas or carefully constructed public personas. This was different, genuine, unguarded. "What about you?" Maggie asked eventually. "If you don't mind me asking, are you headed to LA for work?" "Partially," Keanu nodded. "I just finished some training for a film, but I'm also visiting family. My sister has been dealing with some health issues, and I try to check in when I can." Maggie's expression softened with concern. "I'm sorry to hear that. Is she okay?" "She's tough," Keanu said, a hint of pride in his voice. "Been fighting her whole life. But yes, she's doing better now, thank you." A comfortable silence fell between them. Maggie looked out the window at the vast landscape below, while Keanu returned to his book. There was no pressure to fill the quiet with small talk. Just a peaceful coexistence as the plane continued its journey southward. After a few minutes, Maggie's phone buzzed with a text message. She smiled as she read it. "My sister," she explained. "Checking that the flight's on time. She's already waiting at the airport." "You two must be close," Keanu observed. "We are now," Maggie said. "Though we went through a rough patch in our 20s. She was the pretty thin sister who could wear anything and got all the guys. I was..." She gestured to herself. "Well, not that. Took me years to stop comparing myself to her." "Comparison is the thief of joy," Keanu said softly. "Theodore Roosevelt." Maggie identified the quote with surprise. "You read him too?" Keanu nodded. "I collect quotes like some people collect stamps. Words that help make sense of things." "Me too." Maggie's eyes brightened. "My classroom has quote posters everywhere. The kids pretend to ignore them, but I catch them reading them all the time." They exchanged favorite quotes for a while, discovering a shared appreciation for everything from ancient philosophers to modern poets. Their conversation flowed easily, punctuated by occasional laughter that drew curious glances from nearby passengers. Neither of them noticed the young man a few rows ahead discreetly pointing his phone in their direction, or the woman across, the aisle typing rapidly on her phone. The plane began its initial descent into Los Angeles, the captain announcing they would be landing in approximately 20 minutes. Flight attendants moved through the cabin, collecting trash and ensuring tray tables were stowed. Thomas stopped by their row, gathering Maggie's empty cup and napkin. "We'll be on the ground soon," he said with a warm smile. "Was everything okay for the remainder of the flight?" "Perfect," Maggie assured him. After Thomas moved on, Keanu turned to Maggie. "I have a car service picking me up at the airport. Can I offer you a ride to your sister's? Save her the trouble of airport traffic." Maggie looked touched, but shook her head. "That's incredibly kind, but Lisa would be heartbroken. She's been planning this pickup for weeks, made a welcome sign and everything." "Of course," Keanu nodded, understanding completely. Family comes first. As the plane began its final approach, banking slightly to line up with the runway, Maggie gripped the armrests again. Flying had never been her favorite thing, and landings were particularly nerve-wracking. Noticing her tension, Keanu gently offered his hand. Sometimes it helps to hold on to something besides the armrest, he said. Less like a roller coaster that way. Gratefully, Maggie placed her hand in his. His palm was warm and reassuring, and she felt her anxiety ease slightly as the plane continued its descent. "So, Maggie Peterson," Keanu said conversationally, as if they weren't currently hurtling toward the ground at several hundred miles per hour. "Tell me about the book you're reading. I noticed it in your bag earlier." The simple question and his obvious attempt to distract her from the landing made Maggie smile despite her nervousness. "It's called The Midnight Library by Matt Haig," she replied, focusing on his question rather than the sensation of descent. "It's about a woman who finds herself in a library between life and death, where each book represents a different version of her life if she'd made different choices." "Sounds fascinating," Keanu said genuinely. "What's your take on it so far?" As Maggie described the book's premise and themes. The plane touched down with barely a bump, tires squealing slightly against the runway. She had been so engrossed in their conversation that she'd hardly noticed the landing. "And we're here." Keanu smiled, gently releasing her hand as the plane taxied toward the terminal. Maggie looked out the window at the bright California sunshine, then back at Keanu. "Thank you," she said simply. "For everything." "No need for thanks," he replied. "It was my pleasure." As the plane reached the gate and the seatbelt sign dinged off, passengers began the familiar routine of standing too quickly, retrieving overhead luggage, and forming an impatient queue in the aisle. Keanu and Maggie remained seated, in no rush to join the crush. "Let me get your bag," Keanu offered once the aisle had cleared somewhat. He stood and easily lifted her carry-on from the overhead bin, along with his own simple backpack. As they made their way toward the exit, Nancy stood at the door, mechanically thanking passengers as they deplaned. When she saw Maggie approaching, her professional smile faltered slightly. "Thank you for flying with us," she said stiffly. Maggie paused, considering her response. She could walk past without acknowledgement. She could make a cutting remark. Instead, she simply said, "I hope you have a good day." Nancy's eyes widened in surprise. "You too," she replied after a moment, sounding genuinely thrown by Maggie's graciousness. In the jetway, Maggie turned to Keanu. "I don't know if our paths will cross again after this, but I just want you to know how much your kindness meant to me today. It's something I'll remember for a long time." Keanu seemed slightly embarrassed by her gratitude. "It wasn't anything special," he insisted. "Just basic human decency." "But that's just it," Maggie said with a sad smile. "In a world where basic human decency often feels rare, it becomes extraordinary." They walked together through the terminal, an unlikely pair drawing curious glances, the famous actor in his casual clothes and baseball cap, and the heavy-set teacher in her purple tunic. But neither of them paid any attention to the stares. They were too engaged in their conversation, laughing about a story Maggie was telling about her most mischievous student. As they approached the main terminal area, Maggie spotted a woman holding a colorful sign reading, "Welcome, Aunt Maggie." Her sister Lisa was bouncing on her toes excitedly, her small baby bump visible beneath her flowing sundress. "There she is," Maggie said, her face lighting up. Keanu smiled at her joy. "Looks like you're in good hands." Before they parted ways, Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out a small card. "If you ever want to talk books or philosophy again," he said, handing it to her, "this is my assistant's email. She'll make sure your message gets to me." Maggie took the card, touched by the gesture. "Thank you," she said again, knowing the words were inadequate for everything this stranger had done for her today. With a final smile and a gentle squeeze of her shoulder, Keanu headed toward a different exit, where his driver would be waiting. Maggie watched him go for a moment before turning toward her sister, her heart lighter than it had been in years. What neither of them realized was that their simple interaction, an act of kindness at 30,000 feet, had already begun to spread. Beyond the confines of Flight 1523, Lisa's hug nearly knocked Maggie off her feet. Despite her small baby bump, Lisa threw her arms around her sister with the enthusiasm of someone who hadn't seen their favorite person in years. "I missed you so much," Lisa said, her voice muffled against Maggie's shoulder. "I missed you too," Maggie replied, blinking back happy tears. "Look at you. You're glowing." Lisa stepped back and playfully patted her growing belly. "Growing a human is exhausting but worth it." She peered over Maggie's shoulder, her eyes widening. "Wait, was that... Maggie, was that Keanu Reeves you were walking with?" Maggie felt her cheeks warm. "Yes, actually, we sat together on the flight." "You sat with Keanu Reeves? Like, the Keanu Reeves?" Lisa's voice had risen several octaves, causing nearby travelers to glance their way. "It's a long story," Maggie said, suddenly aware of the curious looks they were attracting. "I'll tell you everything in the car." As they made their way to short-term parking, Lisa bombarded her with questions. "What was he like? Did you get a photo? Was he nice?" "I heard he's super nice." Maggie smiled, thinking about the kindness he had shown her when she needed it most. "He was exactly as nice as everyone says he is, maybe even nicer." In the car, as they navigated the busy Los Angeles traffic, Maggie recounted the entire story. The humiliating confrontation with Nancy, Keanu's unexpected intervention, and the hours of conversation that followed. Lisa listened with growing outrage, her knuckles whitening on the steering wheel. "That flight attendant should be fired. How dare she treat you that way?" "It wasn't the first time something like that's happened," Maggie said with a resigned shrug. "Probably won't be the last." "That doesn't make it okay," Lisa protested, her protective instincts flaring. "You should file a complaint with the airline." Maggie thought about it. Usually she would just try to forget these incidents to push away the humiliation and move on. But something felt different this time. Perhaps it was Keanu's quiet confidence in standing up for her, or perhaps she was finally tired of accepting mistreatment as her due. "Maybe I will," she said thoughtfully. Lisa glanced at her with surprise. "Really? That's great, Mags. I'm proud of you." They pulled into the driveway of Lisa's cozy bungalow in a quiet neighborhood. Palm trees swayed gently in the breeze, and the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the neatly trimmed lawn. "Home sweet home," Lisa announced. "Well, for the next 2 weeks anyway." Inside, Lisa's husband Brian greeted Maggie with a warm hug. The famous Aunt Maggie. Lisa hasn't talked about anything else for weeks. After getting settled in the guest room and freshening up, Maggie joined them for an early dinner on the patio. The mild California evening was a welcome change from Portland's autumn chill, and the smell of Brian's grilled chicken and vegetables made her stomach growl appreciatively. "So," Brian said as he served the food, "Lisa tells me you had quite the celebrity encounter today." Before Maggie could respond, Lisa's phone chimed with a notification. She glanced at it, then did a double take. "Oh my God," she breathed, staring at the screen. "Maggie, you're trending." "I'm what?" Maggie nearly choked on her water. Lisa turned the phone to show her. On the screen was a social media post with a blurry photo of Keanu and Maggie walking through the airport terminal. The caption read, "Just witnessed Keanu Reeves defend an overweight woman who was being humiliated by a flight attendant, then spent the entire flight talking to her. He offered his own seat next to him when she was nearly in tears. Be more like Keanu." The post already had thousands of likes and shares. Worse, the comments section was filling up rapidly, with people speculating about who Maggie was and what exactly had happened. "This can't be happening," Maggie whispered, feeling the blood drain from her face. She had always valued her privacy, had deliberately avoided social media beyond a rarely used Facebook account to keep up with former students' parents. The idea of strangers discussing her, and specifically discussing her body, made her physically ill. Lisa scrolled through more posts, her expression growing increasingly concerned. "There are more pictures, and someone posted a video of you two talking at the gate." Brian, sensing Maggie's distress, gently took the phone from his wife's hand. Maybe we should put this away for now. Let's enjoy our dinner and deal with this later. Maggie nodded gratefully, but the damage was done. What had been a privately meaningful interaction, a rare moment of being seen and respected, was now public property, dissected and commented on by strangers who knew nothing about. Her dinner passed in a blur. Maggie pushed food around her plate, her appetite gone. Lisa and Brian tried to distract her with stories about the nursery they were planning and the names they were considering for their daughter, but Maggie's thoughts kept returning to those social media posts. After helping clean up, she excused herself to the guest room, claiming jet lag. Once alone, she sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out her phone, steeling herself before typing her own name into the search bar. The results were overwhelming. News outlets had already picked up the story. Keanu Reeves' airport angel moment, read one headline. Actor stands up to fat-shaming flight attendant, proclaimed another. There were dozens of posts, most using the same few photos taken by passengers on the flight or in the airport. In most of the pictures, her face was at least partially obscured, but anyone who knew her would recognize her immediately. Her purple tunic, her curly hair, her size. As she scrolled through the comments, she found they fell into predictable categories. There were the Keanu fans praising his kindness. There were the inevitable trolls making cruel jokes about her weight. And there were people defending her, often in ways that still centered her size. Even overweight people deserve respect, as if that needed saying. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. Maggie, this is Thomas, from the flight today. I hope you don't mind me reaching out. The airline gave me your contact information after what happened. I wanted to check that you're okay with all this attention online. Also, the airline's customer relations team would like to speak with you. She stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Another notification popped up, an email from her school principal. Are you the woman in this viral story? Parents are asking. A knock at the bedroom door startled her. Lisa peeked in, her face etched with concern. You okay? She asked softly. Maggie looked up, feeling tears threaten. I don't know, she admitted. This is a lot. Lisa sat beside her on the bed, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. I know, but hey, at least most people are on your side. And Keanu Reeves, that's pretty cool, right? It is, Maggie agreed. But that's not the point. I didn't want any of this attention. I just wanted to visit my sister without being humiliated for existing in my body. And now somehow that private humiliation has become this public spectacle. Lisa was quiet for a moment, processing her sister's words. You're right, she said finally. I'm sorry. I got caught up in the celebrity angle and didn't think about how this feels for you. They sat in silence, the distant sound of traffic filtering through the window. Finally, Maggie took a deep breath. The airline wants to talk to me, she said, showing Lisa the text from Thomas. Are you going to do it? Maggie thought about it. I think I should. Not for me, necessarily, but what happened to me happens to people like me all the time. Maybe speaking up could make a difference. Lisa squeezed her shoulder. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. That night, Maggie slept fitfully, dreaming of cameras and staring faces. She woke early, the unfamiliar room bathed in the soft light of dawn. For a moment she lay still, trying to organize her thoughts about the situation she now found herself in. Her phone showed dozens of notifications, messages from friends who had recognized her in the viral posts, more emails from colleagues, and several voicemails from numbers she didn't recognize. There was even a message from a morning talk show asking for an interview. With shaking hands, she composed a response to Thomas, agreeing to speak with the airline representatives, but requesting privacy. Then she drafted an email to her principal, confirming that yes, she was the woman in the story, but asking that the school help protect her privacy during her vacation. As she finished, a new email notification appeared. The sender was simply KR Assistant, and the subject line read, Checking in. Maggie opened it immediately. Dear Ms. Peterson, Mr. Reeves asked me to reach out to see how you're doing. He's Become aware of the social media attention surrounding your interaction and wants to express his regret for any unwanted publicity this has caused you. He also wants you to know that he has declined all requests for comment about the incident, feeling that it would only fuel further attention. However, he's concerned about your well-being and wanted to make sure you're okay. If there's anything he can do to help navigate this situation, please don't hesitate to let us know. Sincerely, Patricia Williams, Executive Assistant to Keanu Reeves. Maggie read the email twice, touched by his concern. It was exactly the kind of thoughtfulness she would expect from him after their conversation. She drafted a reply, thanking him for his kindness both on the plane and now. She assured him she was managing, though overwhelmed by the attention. Before sending it, she added a P.S. Please tell Mr. Reeves that our conversation about the Midnight Library inspired me to start a book club with my fourth graders when I return to school. If changing one small thing creates a whole new version of your life, as the book suggests, then his kindness on that plane has already created a beautiful ripple effect. As she hit send, Maggie felt something shift inside her. The unwanted attention was still uncomfortable, the invasion of privacy still troubling, but underneath that was a growing realization. This viral moment wasn't defining her by her size as she had feared. It was defining her as someone worthy of kindness, someone who stood up to mistreatment with dignity, someone who connected genuinely with a person many considered untouchable. Maybe, just maybe, that was a story worth telling. She got up and dressed, ready to face whatever the day would bring. In the kitchen, she found Lisa already up, making decaf coffee with one hand while scrolling through her phone with the other. "Morning," Maggie said, trying to sound more cheerful than she felt. Lisa looked up with an expression Maggie couldn't quite read. "Morning. So, there's been a development in your story." "What now?" Maggie asked, bracing herself. Lisa handed over her phone. The airline released a statement. "And Nancy has been suspended pending investigation." The headline read, "Airline apologizes to passenger in viral Keanu Reeves incident. Flight attendant suspended." Maggie stared at the screen, a complex mix of emotions washing over her. Vindication, certainly, but also an unexpected twinge of empathy for Nancy, whose career was now in jeopardy. "There's more," Lisa said gently. "People are asking to hear your side of the story, like a lot of people." Maggie looked out the kitchen window at the bright California morning, considering the strange turn her simple vacation had taken. "Maybe," she said slowly. It's time they heard it. 3 days later, Maggie sat in an uncomfortable chair in the airline's Los Angeles administrative offices. The leather squeaked as she shifted nervously, waiting for the customer relations team to arrive. Lisa had offered to come with her, but Maggie decided this was something she needed to do alone. The door opened, and a woman in her 50s with a kind smile extended her hand. "Ms. Peterson, I'm Diane Taylor, Head of Customer Relations. Thank you so much for coming in today." 2 more people followed her into the room, a younger man in a crisp suit who introduced himself as the airline's PR director, and Thomas, the flight attendant from the plane who had texted her. "It's good to see you again," Thomas said warmly, "though I wish under better circumstances." Once they were all seated around a small conference table, Diane cleared her throat. "First and foremost, Ms. Peterson, we want to extend our deepest apologies for what happened on your flight. It falls far short of the standards we set for our employees." Maggie nodded, appreciating the sincerity in the woman's tone. "We've reviewed the incident with several passengers who witnessed it, as well as with Nancy herself," Diane continued. "There's no excuse for how you were treated." The PR director, Michael, leaned forward. "Ms. Peterson, we're prepared to offer you flight vouchers and frequent flyer miles as compensation for your experience." Maggie had been expecting this, the standard corporate response to a PR problem. But in the days since the incident had gone viral, she'd been doing a lot of thinking about what she really wanted from this situation. "Actually," she said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice, "I'm not interested in vouchers or miles." The 3 airline representatives exchanged glances. "What would you prefer?" Diane asked carefully. Maggie took a deep breath. I want three things. First, I'd like the airline to review and revise its policies regarding passengers of size. The current policies are humiliating and often inconsistently applied. Michael started taking notes as she continued. Second, I want a commitment to improve training for all flight attendants on how to handle sensitive situations with compassion and discretion. Diane nodded. Those are reasonable requests, Ms. Peterson. And the third? I want to speak with Nancy. The request hung in the air for a moment. Thomas looked particularly surprised. May I ask why? Diane inquired. Maggie had asked herself the same question repeatedly. Why would she want to face the woman who had humiliated her in front of a plane full of strangers? Because this isn't just about policies or training, she explained. It's about human connection, about seeing each other as people, not problems. After a brief discussion among themselves, the airline representatives agreed to arrange a meeting, though they warned that Nancy might decline. To Maggie's surprise, however, Nancy agreed to meet the following day. That evening, as Maggie helped Lisa and Brian assemble baby furniture for the nursery, she received another email from Keanu's assistant. Mr. Reeves appreciated your message and was touched by your plans for the book club. He asked me to share that he will be doing a reading at Children's Hospital Los Angeles this weekend and wondered if you might like to join him. He thought the children might enjoy meeting a real teacher who loves books as much as you do. Lisa squealed when Maggie showed her the email. You have to go, this is amazing. Maggie hesitated. I don't know. I'm not sure I want more attention. This isn't about attention, Lisa pointed out, gently placing a hand on her growing belly. This is about sharing something you love with kids who could use some joy. Put that way, how could Maggie refuse? The next morning brought the meeting she'd been both dreading and strangely looking forward to. Nancy looked different in street clothes, younger, less imposing, and visibly nervous as she entered the small meeting room the airline had arranged for them. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me, Maggie said, breaking the awkward silence. Nancy's hands fidgeted with her purse strap. I should be thanking you. Most people would have sued the airline by now, not asked for a conversation. They sat across from each other at a small table. No airline representatives were present. Maggie had insisted on privacy. I've been suspended, Nancy said after a moment. Probably going to be fired, can't really blame them. Maggie studied the woman's face, searching for signs of the callousness she'd displayed on the plane. Instead, she saw exhaustion and defeat. I'm not here to get you fired, Maggie said. I'm here to understand why it happened. Nancy looked up, surprise evident in her expression. Why? Because what happened to me on that plane wasn't an isolated incident. It happens to people like me all the time in all sorts of situations, and I want to understand the thinking behind it. Nancy was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I was having a terrible day. My boyfriend broke up with me that morning. By text, after 3 years together. She shook her head. That's not an excuse, just context. I took my personal frustration out on you, and that was completely unprofessional. Maggie nodded, understanding all too well how personal pain could spill over into other areas of life. But there's more to it, Nancy continued, seeming determined to be honest now that she'd started. The truth is, I've struggled with my own body image my entire life. Been on diet since I was 12. My mother used to say that being fat was the worst thing a woman could be. Tears welled in Nancy's eyes. When I saw you, something in me just, I don't know, snapped. Like if I could make your size the problem, then I wouldn't have to face my own issues. The raw honesty surprised Maggie. She had expected excuses, maybe corporate talking points, not this vulnerable confession. Thank you for telling me that, Maggie said softly. They talked for nearly an hour, about body image, about the pressure Nancy felt as a flight attendant to maintain a certain appearance, about Maggie's lifetime of similar encounters with strangers, who felt entitled to comment on her body. By the end, both women had shed tears. They hadn't become friends. What happened was too hurtful for that. But they had reached something like understanding. I truly am sorry, Nancy said as they prepared to leave. And I'm going to get help for my issues, therapy maybe. I hope you do, Maggie replied. Not because you hurt me, but because you deserve to be free from that kind of self-judgment. As Maggie left the airline offices, she felt lighter somehow. The meeting with Nancy hadn't erased what happened, but it had transformed it from a source of humiliation into something else. A catalyst for change, perhaps. For both of them. Saturday came quickly. Lisa drove Maggie to Children's Hospital, where Keanu's assistant met them in the lobby. Patricia was a brisk, efficient woman who managed to convey both warmth and professional distance. Mr. Reeves is already with the children, she explained, leading them through corridors brightened with colorful murals. He's reading the Phantom Toll Booth. The kids voted on it. The children's ward playroom was filled with small patients, in wheelchairs and hospital gowns, all focused on Keanu, who sat on a low stool reading animatedly from the book. He looked up as they entered, his face breaking into a genuine smile when he saw Maggie. He finished the chapter before setting the book aside and standing to greet her. "You came," he said simply, as if her presence was a gift. "How could I resist?" Maggie replied. "Books and kids are my two favorite things." Keanu introduced her to the children as my friend Maggie, who is an amazing teacher. The kids, who ranged from about 5 to 12 years old, immediately bombarded her with questions about her students, her favorite books, and whether she gave a lot of homework. Maggie found herself sitting cross-legged on the floor, deep in conversation with a 9-year-old girl named Zoe, who was receiving chemotherapy, but couldn't stop talking about her love for Roald Dahl books. Across the room, Keanu was helping a boy with an arm cast build a Lego spaceship. The hours flew by. Maggie read stories, helped with art projects, and even taught the kids a classroom clapping game that had them all laughing. Not once did anyone mention the viral video or what had happened on the plane. Here, she wasn't the woman from the Keanu Reeves story. She was just Maggie, the teacher who loved books. Later, as the event wound down and tired children were wheeled back to their rooms by parents and nurses, Keanu approached her again. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "The kids loved you." "I loved them," Maggie replied honestly. "This was exactly what I needed this week." They walked together toward the exit, Patricia discreetly keeping a few steps behind them. "How have you been handling everything?" Keanu asked. "The attention, I mean." Maggie considered the question. "It's been strange," she admitted, "but also transformative, in a way I never expected." She told him about her meeting with Nancy, about the airline's commitment to review their policies, and about the surprising number of messages she'd received from other plus-size travelers sharing similar experiences. "I spent so much time trying to be invisible," she said, "trying not to take up space. Now suddenly I'm visible to thousands of people and it's uncomfortable but also maybe necessary? Like maybe this happened for a reason." Keanu nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes the universe has plans we couldn't imagine for ourselves." They reached the hospital entrance where Lisa was waiting with the car. "Will you be okay?" Keanu asked. "With whatever comes next?" Maggie smiled, feeling a confidence she hadn't known before. "I think I will be. Actually, I'm considering starting a blog about traveling while plus size, turning this whole experience into something positive." "I'd read that blog," he said with a warm smile, "and for what it's worth, I think you're exactly the right person to write it." They said goodbye with a brief hug, both knowing their paths might never cross again, but also knowing that their chance encounter had changed something fundamental for both of them. In the car, Lisa couldn't stop talking about how surreal the whole thing was. "My sister hanging out with Keanu Reeves at a children's hospital. If someone had told me this 2 weeks ago." Maggie laughed, gazing out the window at the palm trees and blue sky of Los Angeles. "Life is strange, isn't it? You never know when something terrible might lead to something wonderful." That evening, sitting on Lisa's patio with her laptop, Maggie opened a new document and began to type. "My name is Maggie Peterson. I'm 42 years old, I teach 4th grade, and I've spent most of my life trying to be invisible." This is the story of how Keanu Reeves, a flight attendant named Nancy, and an unexpected moment of public humiliation taught me to take up space in the world unapologetically. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as the California sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. Sometimes, she reflected, it takes being seen by someone else before you can truly see yourself. And sometimes the most unthinkable acts aren't acts of cruelty, but unexpected moments of kindness that change everything.